I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, I'm speaking with Roberta Nee Adams, the author of Rebecca's Soliloquy, A True Story. It is a gripping tale of a woman's journey of over 250 miles to rescue her wounded husband from a Union prison camp during the Civil War, and the untold struggles and courage of individuals during that time that may have been lost to history, but have been kept alive thanks to a strong oral tradition, particularly in the South. Adams' book tells the grim story of determination, yet courage, and with readers 150 years later, these unbreakable bonds of love still resonate. We thank the team at Mainspring Books for helping us put Roberta in the spotlight today. Roberta, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Logan, for having me.
My pleasure. This is quite a story. And I mentioned that it was born out of the oral tradition of storytelling. And that's the case here. You were told this by your mother-in-law? Tell me who told you this.
It was my late mother-in-law. Her name was Alma Nell Moffett Reinierson, and Rebecca and Augustus were her great-grandparents. And she told me this story, which was really bare bones. And when I went to write it, I had to kind of connect the dots, so to speak, how these events might have all come to pass. So
amazing, amazing. Now, did you do any outside research to find out, whether Rebecca really was a real person or whether this was just a story told? Tell us a little bit about your research for the book.
Well, some of the research, I went to Obion County and I went to Troy, Tennessee. They lived, their farm was outside of Troy. It was in Obion County, which is the very northwest county in the state, right along the Mississippi River. And I went to Troy Cemetery. I found their headstones. Mm-hmm. They did indeed exist. My sister, Sharon Nee Goodman, helped me to do research on the people involved. And through the agricultural census, we found out how large Augustus' farm was, and even how much livestock he had and what his farm produced and things like that. So, yes, they were very real indeed. And
yeah. And also the Civil War sounds like it's ancient history. In some ways it is. Yes. In some ways it's not. It goes back just a few generations and you're there.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, when Gone with the Wind came out, there were still living Civil War veterans. So, exactly. And that was 1939, which, okay, that's been almost 100 years, but
exactly.
Not that, like you said, not that many generations. And the story just captivated me. I've always really related with that time period. So yeah. I just love the story and just wanted to do her story justice.
And that antebellum period is still very much alive in the South. I've lived in the South, and I'm a native New Yorker, and I moved down to Atlanta to be a TV news reporter. All these people were referencing the Civil War. And I had never heard such a thing. And people up north were called Yankees. And I was like, wow, this is still alive down here.
Yes, yes.
It was different for the South because fortunes were lost. Many more people were killed. Land was taken away. So the pain of the Civil War is more real for the people of the South than for the people of the North.
Absolutely. Most of the Civil War was fought in the South, like you said. As a matter of fact, Augustus and his brother Charles was owned a store in Troy, and his store was taken over and his bank account was seized. And both of them were quite wealthy in terms of the day. They were both worth a little over $250,000 before the war, and lost most of their fortune, but then regained a good bit of it, both of them back, never to pre-war level, but they gained a lot of it back after the war. So
yeah. Tell us a little bit what it was like for you reliving Rebecca's journey and Rebecca's life. I mean, I'd imagine seeing those headstones with her name on it and her husband's name on it was quite chilling for you, right?
It was. I felt so close to them. because again, their story was just so amazing. She had to have been an amazing woman, and just the love that she had for her husband to go through what she went through. It seemed, of course, very real to me going to Troy, seeing their headstones, and the family plot. There were other family members I didn't write into the story because I wanted to focus on her. But yeah, that was quite something. When I was writing the book, I went into the Library of Congress and I found a map that had been made in 1864 of the Mississippi River. So I copied out 4x4 squares from Memphis to St. Louis, and there were like 82 of these squares, and I pieced them all together like a puzzle, and I taped them up on a door while I was writing the book so I could gauge how far they might have traveled, the towns that they went through, things they might have seen on the trip. There were Yankee forts that they passed, and even a large Yankee training camp that was the second largest Union training camp that they would have had to go by. So that was very interesting.
Yeah, it's also interesting when you travel through the South, particularly when you get away from the highway a little bit, that a lot of it's unchanged, other than perhaps the roads are paved where they might not have been paved before. And in some cases, roads still aren't paved. So
Right.
when you're down there, you really get a sense of the history.
Oh, yes. And there are a lot of monuments. There's a lot of uh, the DAR actually, even though they were with the Revolutionary War, has done a lot of restoration and keeping up with a lot of the Civil War things. As a matter of fact, Tullahoma is 16, where I grew up. There were both Union and Confederate forces that went through Tullahoma. So when the house that I grew up in was on a little hill, and at the bottom of the hill there were bunkers, earthen bunkers, and my brothers would find mini balls down there.
Wow.
So it was, that close to where I grew up.
Yeah. And also the squares are still there that you mentioned as
Yes.
well.
Oh, yes. Yeah, and the
And
courthouses.
that's my favorite part of the South, is to find a beautiful old square that exists. And generally, it is built around a Civil War memorial or monument in many cases as well.
A lot of those, absolutely. And a lot of antebellum homes still stand.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's definitely a beautiful, it's the South during that Civil War era obviously was the worst of times, and it was also the best of times. I mean, there were many, many layers going on for what caused the conflict. Part of it, of course, was to liberate the slaves. Other parts of it was a power grab by the North. And then a lot of it were individuals who were pulled into this war to try to fight to maintain their lives as they knew it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One thing interesting I found out when I was researching the book is that Augustus farm was a little over 300 acres. So that was quite a large farm at the time, and he had to have a lot of help to run that. But in the 1860 census, he had no slaves. So he had to have freed them prior to 1860. And then I imagine made some other arrangement with them, like maybe tenant farming or something like that, because he still kept his farm and had his farm even after the war.
Right.
So, there had to be something there that changed, but well before the war, he had freed his slaves.
Yeah, I mean, even Washington was, troubled by the idea of keeping slaves. He found it to be economically unfeasible as well. I mean, because you were basically not only supporting the workers, but you were supporting their families and their children. And, it was a very, very complex, it's a dark chapter, a bad chapter.
Yes.
In our history. Almost every nation has a similar type of dark chapter in their history where people didn't respect the value of all human beings.
Right.
And But it is intriguing to go back and look at the stories of people like Rebecca and this woman. I mean, we hear 250 miles. Well, you're not doing it in a Lexus, you
No,
know. You're
no,
doing it, the hard way to travel all those
yeah,
miles, and it's every mile is hard earned and hard fought. So it
exactly.
is quite an amazing story. Have you visualized it as a movie or a series or anything?
Absolutely. There is a script written.
Great.
I would love to have it. I think it would be an amazing movie, showing it, you know, what she went through. And the book is told, the story is told in letters that she writes to her husband, just as her way of keeping close to her husband, even though the letters supposedly never even got mailed, or she started getting them back when they did get mailed. So, actually, you may be familiar with the director, Ron Maxwell,
Mm-hmm.
directed Gettysburg and Gods and Generals.
Yep.
He read the book and told me that he was well into the book before he realized that the letters were not authentic letters, that I had actually written them. And he did say if he were directing the movie, he wouldn't change a thing. He would direct it just like it was written.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
And
That's quite a compliment that he
oh,
thought your letters were
absolutely.
genuine. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
because he's a well-known authority, of course,
Right.
on the Civil War. So I was very pleased with that. But I do hope, and I am taking steps to try to get it made into a movie.
Sure.
It would be wonderful, especially considering some of the stuff that comes out nowadays.
Exactly. Exactly. And also, when I started acting, a couple of decades ago, somebody said to me, it's like a message in a bottle. You put your work out there and you never know who's going to find it and in whose hands it'll turn up in. And it works like that. When you least expect it, you get a phone call or an email, or somebody will say, hey, I loved your book, or I loved your performance, or I loved this. So we'll keep our fingers crossed, and we're glad that your work is
Okay.
out there. We're glad you're here on Spotlight today to talk about it. Are you working on any other books right now or thinking about it?
Yes, actually, there's a story within the story
Mhm.
about a bonnet box. And this is another true story, and believe it or not, with the same family, the Moffat family. It was a cousin to Charles and Augustus who came down from Massachusetts, moved to Nashville, and he married a Southern girl from a well-known family in Nashville. And when war broke out, he swore he would not bear arms against either side.
Mm.
But he took a position as a guard in the federal prison in Nashville where the prisoners of war were taken.
Mm.
And in that federal prison, there was a shoe shop. And he had been a shoemaker in his previous life. So he was over the shoe shop. The prisoners slaughtered the cattle, tanned the leather, and made the shoes in the prison for Union soldiers.
Wow.
He befriended a Confederate prisoner, and this prisoner made a bonnet box. The ladies used to keep their mourning bonnets in boxes. And it was about 18 inches wide and maybe 12 inches deep and 12 inches high, 10 or 12 inches high. It is covered in the leather that they tanned for the shoes. It's put together with shoe tacks, and it's decorated in carved bone.
Wow.
And this prisoner made this as a gift for Luther Moffat and his wife for an anniversary. And it just goes to show in the story, of course, Rebecca saves the life of a Union officer. And then this Union guard befriends a Confederate prisoner. And it just shows how one-on-one it's different. On the
Exactly.
battlefield, they would have tried to kill each other.
Right.
But one-on-one,
Right.
it's
Once there's a human face there, not just a faceless mass. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well,
And yeah,
that sounds like it's got the makings of being a wonderful story as well. This book is called Rebecca's Soliloquy, A True Story. It is wonderful. It is written by Roberta Nee Adams. It's available anywhere you get books. It is highly recommended. It is a gripping tale of a woman's journey of over 250 miles to rescue her wounded husband from a Union prison camp during the Civil War. It is like time traveling, and it really tells the story of a strong, courageous, tender-hearted woman. You won't want to miss this one. Roberta, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
All right, Logan, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.